Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'd now like to introduce you to the MPP for Carleton. She is also chair of the Standing Committee on Social Policy in the Ontario Legislature, Goldie Ghamari, who is a Iranian Canadian. She actually was born in Iran and came to Canada when she was a child. She's attended several of the demonstrations in regards to the situation in Iran and the murder of this young lady, and she's spoken at several of them. And I think she's passionate about this issue. Number one, because of her involvement in politics, and probably more importantly because of the fact of her connection with Iran. Goldie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So we've just listened to another female Iranian Canadian who actually has written a book about the situation that females face in Iran. Tell me what you think about what happened, I guess, a week or two ago, and the protests that have taken off not only in Iran but around the world.
So I think what happened a couple weeks ago, the brutal murder of Mahsa Amini at the hands of the illegitimate and terrorist Islamic regime in Iran, is an unfortunate reality that Iranians in Iran and around the world have been living with for 43 years. The terrorist Islamic regime is responsible for hundreds of thousands of murders of Iranians who want nothing more than freedom and democracy. And it's just very unfortunate that it's a little difficult to talk about this because it is a little bit of an emotional issue for me, because Mahsa Amini, although I didn't know her, she could have been my sister, she could have been me, she could have been any one of us, and the struggles that she faces are the struggles that all Iranian women face. And I think with the brutal murder of Mahsa Amini at the hands of the terrorist and illegitimate Islamic regime in Iran, that was really the spark that lit the fire of the Iranian people. Because it's not just about compulsory hijab anymore. Iran is an incredibly wealthy country because of the oil that they have. And yet there is overwhelming poverty, because the regime keeps the money for themselves and they spend it on themselves. They've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in land, assets, property overseas, including in Toronto and across Canada.
In Toronto? Seriously?
Yes. There is a 2011 Toronto Star article that speaks about this, and I'm happy to give you the reference to that, where this was mentioned. IRGC officials live in Canada. The most recent example is in, I believe it was 2020, someone snapped a picture of the former head of police in Tehran who had retired, and he was responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths, and he's now living his retirement in Richmond Hill. So again, with the brutal murder of Mahsa Amini, it was a spark that lit the fire, because you have people protesting against compulsory hijab. People are protesting because of abject poverty. Inflation has gone through the roof. I know we're talking about inflation here, but in Iran, it's even worse. And we have a young population that is highly, highly educated. They all have very advanced university degrees. And yet after they graduate, there's no jobs, there's no employment. And when they speak up or try to criticize the Islamic regime, they're thrown in jail. And Iran has one of the highest percentages of political prisoners in their jails.
The last guest I had suggested this was not only an issue of sex and sexism, but also of ethnicity. She was Kurdish, I understand, and that Kurds are discriminated against in Iran quite significantly. Do you think that's true?
So Iran is a very ethnically diverse population. approximately 50% of Iranians come from various ethnic minorities. You've got the Kurds, you've got the Azerbaijanis, you've got the Turks, you have Arabs, you have Lor, you have Baluch. And part of the Islamic regime's strategy has been to divide and conquer. And so, yes, they absolutely discriminate against Iranian ethnic minorities as a way to keep the population divided, because the biggest fear for the Islamic regime is for Iranian people to unite as one. And
even
in fact,
when 50% of the population are part of different ethnic groups, one would think that all those ethnic groups could get together and challenge.
that's what's happening right now. That's exactly what's happening right now. We're seeing uprisings and protests all across Iran in various provinces. All the various ethnic minorities are rising up and speaking out. Last Friday, the Iranian media is calling it Bloody Friday because in the province of Sistan and Baluchistan, which is in the southwestern corner of Iran, which is pretty much the opposite of where the province of Kurdistan is, which is the northeast, sorry, the province of Kurdistan is in the northwestern corner of Iran, and the province of Sistan and Baluchistan is in the southwestern part of Iran. So they're about as far apart as they can be. Two completely different ethnicities, different cultures, different dialects and languages, and yet they are also protesting the regime. And last Friday, the Iranian media is calling it Bloody Friday because regime forces went in and not just murdered people, but they waited until a lot of them were coming out of the mosque and they started shooting at them right as they finished their prayers. And interestingly enough, there was an interview, someone who is a spokesperson for the Kurdish Democratic Party in Iran was being interviewed on Iranian media. And he said, and I'm happy to share that video with you after, because I did translate that part of what he was saying in Farsi. And he essentially says the Islamic regime, their strategy has always been to divide the people of Kurdistan and create divisions with the rest of Iranian people and Iranian ethnicities. And they have realized that the unity of Iranians is the biggest fear for the Islamic regime, and they're not going to fall for it anymore, and they're going to continue standing in solidarity with the rest of the people of Iran. I mean, Iranians, we are ethnically diverse, we are religiously diverse, we are culturally diverse, and we are politically diverse. But the one thing that unites us as Iranians is our love for a free, democratic, and secular Iran.
The supreme leader, I understand, came out last week and dismissed these protests as nothing but some agitators, and that they weren't going to change anything in any way, shape, or form. What do you think is going to happen?
I mean, in the past, when people have risen up, they have been brutally quelled. The last time the Islamic regime shut down the internet for 3 days, over 1,500 people were massacred during that internet blackout.
1,500?
1,500 people in 3 days, yes. 1,500 protesters. This time around, even though they've shut down the internet, people have not given up. And I think part of the reason is this time around, these protests are being spearheaded by women. And the images that we're seeing come out of Iran are images that we have not seen in 43 years. Women are on the streets, they're burning their hijab, they're fighting back, they're walking around without hijab. And now what's coming out are videos of high school students, kids as young as 12, 13, 14, who are taking off their hijab as well in school. They're tearing down the pictures of the Supreme Leader, which is on in every classroom. They're tearing them down, tearing them up, throwing them in the garbage can, burning them. And they're on the streets chanting, waving their headscarves, saying, "Down with the dictator." They're chanting, "Women, life, freedom." They're chanting, "We are all Mahsa." And again, these are things that we have not seen in Iran in 43 years.
I understand that she actually, this young lady that was murdered, actually was wearing the hijab. It just wasn't supposedly on perfectly. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. And it's unfortunate because this is what Iran, the Islamic regime in Iran's morality police does. They have a whole group of people that are hired, and their only job is to go around in plain clothes in public areas, in airports, at restaurants, in theaters, wherever, you name it. And their job is to identify who they think isn't wearing their proper compulsory hijab properly. And they drag them into vans and they take them to a re-education class, a mandatory re-education class on why they should wear the hijab. And sometimes women leave and they're okay, but oftentimes they're beaten to death. And there really is no rhyme or reason to it. It's just a matter of what the people who are doing this feel. And
so they're not warned, they're not charged, they're not ticketed. They're
no,
dragged into a van, taken immediately to a re-education place and beaten? Seriously?
yes. And I have video footage of that I'm more than happy to share with you.
For a few strands of hair showing.
Exactly. They murdered Mahsa Amini because she wasn't wearing her compulsory hijab properly, because a few strands of hair were showing. And the supreme leader, sorry, not the supreme leader, but one of the clerics who is one of the top level people, has been quoted as saying that if women are allowed to, the quote is something along the lines of, women who don't wear hijab and let their hair blow freely in the wind are a corruption to society.
Are a corruption to society just by seeing a few strands of hair or
Yes.
hair blowing in the wind.
Yes. If you're a woman, letting your hair blow in the wind in Iran is a crime, punishable by death, which is what happened to Mahsa Amini.
Is it just females that are protesting, or men protesting as well?
Men are protesting as well. And I think the reason that this is being called a women's revolution or a women's protest is because of the fact that this is the first time in the history of Iran that women are coming out in droves to protest. Historically, in the past, it has been majority men, but now it's men and women together united. And even men are supporting women. Men are dying because they're supporting women on the streets. And there are unfortunately so many incidents of men defending women they don't know, and they're being murdered for it.
Now, I understand the issue is far greater than just wearing the hijab, and maybe you can elaborate. But I understand that females in Iran are almost treated as subhuman, that they're not allowed to do a lot of things without the approval of either their father or their husband. Is that correct?
That is correct, unfortunately. I mean, for most Iranians, that's not the case. Most Iranians are very westernized, even the ones living in Iran, but the law is still there. And if a woman wants to, let's say, leave the country, she needs either permission from her father or her husband, or next of kin. Women have no rights over custody of their children. These are all things in law, and that's why men and women are protesting. And some of the things that they're chanting is one of the biggest chants that the people of Iran are saying now is women, life, freedom. And men are chanting this, women are chanting this. Everyone is united against the Islamic regime. And now they're starting to chant, don't call this a protest, call this a revolution.
Our guest tonight is Goldie Ghamari, who is the MPP in Carleton in the Ontario Legislature. She is an Iranian Canadian. She was born in Iran and moved here when she was a child, and she feels very passionately about this issue and has joined in several of the protests and has spoken at them. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. And I want to ask Goldie, if I could, a little bit about her personal connection to Iran and to this issue. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our issue tonight is the brutal slaying of a young lady in Iran that, from what I understand, not only she wasn't wearing a hijab, she was wearing the hijab, but she just had a few strands of hair, showing she was abducted by the what do you call them? The
morality police.
The morality police. What a word. And was brutally murdered. And in Iran, protests sprung up, and the protests have spread around the world. And I understand that this is an issue for females. It's an issue of racism, ethnic problems, given that she was a Kurd. But it's also a problem just for everyone in Iran, given the role that the religious police, the morality police, the dictatorship of the clerics have in Iran. Goldie Ghamari, the MPP in Carleton, is our guest. She is Iranian Canadian. She was born in Iran. She is chair of the Standing Committee on, is it Social Development?
Social Policy.
Social Policy in the Ontario Legislature. This is, I believe, your second term in office. Yes. As being MPP of Carleton. I met her when I was involved in some stuff in Ottawa, and she was extremely helpful and very, very supportive of her community and of her constituents. And she's obviously very passionate about this issue for obvious reasons. Maybe Goldie, take a step back and tell me a little bit about why your family left Iran and what your connection is to Iran and Iranians today.
So my dad left Iran in the mid-70s, before the revolution, and he went to Texas to study electrical engineering. And he returned to Iran after the revolution had taken place. So obviously it was a huge culture shock for him. And he married my mother, and I was born. And in those first few months, my father has told me that, and this is right after when the regime took over, the Islamic regime took over, he was almost executed at a random roadside stop. So my parents were driving, my mom had me in her arms, and they were pulled over. They still don't know who it was, but someone started interrogating him and asked him to step out of the vehicle, and my mom yelled at him saying, "Don't step out. If you do, you're going to be executed." And so my dad just drove off. And it was at that moment that he realized that he cannot raise his family in that country. And so that's when we immigrated to Canada, and I was a year old at the time. I've always had a strong connection with Iran. My parents have always spoken to me and informed me and my sister about what's going on. I can speak Farsi fluently, understand it, no problem. It is my third language. And I've also visited several times when I was younger. So I've experienced it firsthand. I've experienced firsthand the morality police questioning me on my hijab. Now, they didn't actually drag me to a re-education class, but I have experienced that fear. But I think more importantly, right now with what's happening in Iran, as the first Iranian Canadian woman politician to be elected in office in Canada, I have a platform that I can use to speak out and be a voice for Iranian women and Iranians in Iran, because they are dying for the right to live in a free and democratic society. And with the Islamic regime shutting down internet and trying to quell this uprising, the least that I can do as an Iranian who is outside of Iran is to make their voices heard and to share their stories with the world. so that the world can rise up, so that the world can take a strong stance against the illegitimate and terrorist Islamic regime in Iran.
Goldie, if you could tell me a little bit about your feelings about the hijab. You know, some people, obviously, a lot of people want to take it off. Some people want to force people to take it off. In Quebec, they want to take away jobs from people that want to have a hijab on. Have you worn a hijab? You know, obviously you probably wore it in Iran, but have you worn a hijab outside of Iran? And what's your feeling about the hijab and people's rights in regards to either choosing to wear or not wear the hijab?
So I've never worn a hijab outside of Iran. Obviously, when I was in Iran, when I was younger, I had to wear it, and I did not like that. I think ultimately this is about a woman's right to choose whether or not she wants to wear a hijab. For Iranians, there are many women who are protesting in Iran and outside of Iran who are still wearing a hijab, because the issue isn't about removing the hijab. The issue is about freedom and democracy and a person's right to choose.
Goldie Ghamari, MPP for Carleton in the Ontario Legislature. Thank you so much for joining us. If I could just end with one thought, I think that in life, in politics, in world history, sometimes there are big events or even small events that become big events that change the course of history. I happen to think this is one of them. Don't know yet, but I happen to believe this is one of those events, Black Swan event, whatever you want to call it, that may actually change the course of history in Iran and around the world. And
I hope so.
I really congratulate you, Goldie, for playing the role that you're playing, and encourage you to continue doing so. That's our show for tonight, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Goldie.
Thank you.